Hey folks, Casey here and welcome back to the channel. So since the last update on the Ace's EFI install on my 1961 Willys pickup truck, I've installed all of the sub-assemblies that I set up in the last video. Let me bring you in for a closer look. So in the last video we installed the throttle body and we started on the throttle setup. Since then I whipped up this cool little bracket for the CDI coil for the Ace's unit. I've reinstalled my spark plug wires. I've mounted my fuel pressure regulator and plumbed it in a regulated return fashion. I'll add some detail on how I did the fuel lines themselves. There's the coolant temperature sensor, let's not forget that. I'm also adding lines to run to my heater core. Hopefully that sucker doesn't leak. It's been cold here, it would be nice to have a heater. My new thermostat housing is installed, which was just a separate thing I was adding on myself. The old one seeped just a little bit of coolant. My O2 sensor is installed. My exhaust is reinstalled on the vehicle. And then coming around to the back, I cut a little access through the bed so that I can get to the fuel pump and the fuel pump sender. And I have installed and plumbed all of my fuel lines. One of my big beefs with this truck in the beginning was having a non-vented fuel filler. So I actually got this fuel filler from a 67 C10 Chevy, I believe, that has the vent provision, and I've ran that to the vent. So there's the tank. I'll get you underneath and show you how I plumbed the fuel system. All right, folks, I want to take a quick second to talk about the Teflon fuel line and fittings that comes with the Ace's kit. It's actually a fairly impressive fuel system kit in the Ace's Master Kit. It comes with 40 feet of -6 Teflon AN line. Teflon line is pretty slick. You know, it's going to work with some of the modern fuels out there that have alcohol in them. It's not going to deteriorate quite like rubber, but it does have a fairly specific order of operations that you have to install your fittings in. And if you don't do it right, you're going to have some trouble with it. So I think it's actually ultimately easier to work with than standard steel braided AN line. But like I said, the order of operations is important. You can cut this stuff a lot of different ways. You can cut it with a hacksaw. You can cut it with an air angle die grinder with a cutoff wheel. I have these loppers from Vibrant Performance. They make short work of cutting the line. But with Teflon line, anytime you cut it, you're gonna have a little bit of a crimp on the end. When you go to assemble the line, the order of operations is important. This is a -6 straight fitting right here, all right? So if we unthread it, got the cap, and then the ferrule or the olive, and then the fitting itself. The female end of the fitting needs to be the very first piece to go over the end of the line. And as you see, it tries to push the braid off of it. So you have to kind of work it back and forth a little bit, hold it tight. And then once you get it on, to thread it down a little further than I need, I like to pull the braid back up flush with the end of the line, like so. And then I have a pair of billet aluminum Summit Racing AN line vice jaws. These have been with me for a very long time. Remember how we talked about the pinch on the Teflon? Well, Ace's gives you this nice little tool to prep the line for the olive. So you just take this guy right here. You can see it's got a pilot diameter and then it's got a little relief. It helps pull the stainless braid away from the Teflon. So you just stick it in there and you give it kind of a little wiggle like that. And that reshapes the end of the Teflon really nicely, and it gives you a place for the ferrule or the olive, as it's called, to go in between the Teflon and the stainless steel braid inside the line. Just like that, okay? You just come up against any firm structure and you give it a nice little press, and hopefully my camera is focusing in, but you can see that the Teflon is butted up against the inside of the olive. And then I have a little driver from Snap-on. It fits the inside of the Teflon perfectly. I just like to put that in there. Give it a wiggle. It does the same thing the Aces tool, but it reaches a little bit deeper. And that's looking really nice, ready to go together. I like to have on hand the WD-40 Specialist Silicone Spray for doing AN line fittings. It works really good, keeps the aluminum from galling. You don't have to have silicone spray. I imagine any sort of lube would work, but you want to put just a little bit on the fitting itself, and I like to do just a little bit more on the threads. And that will do you. Otherwise, it's just going to get all over your hands. You don't want to overdo the lube for sure. So just press this into the end of the line. Go ahead and pull that out of our vice jaws first. And sometimes it helps to have a firm structure to push against. There you go. All right, so now we can put our fitting in the vice jaws. Like so. All right. It is not necessary to take off your tape from where you made your cut. And in fact, if you do take off the tape, your outer braid is going to kind of fray. It's going to splay out. But if you have the line pulled back into the female fitting, everything's all fully assembled, and you do it absolutely last, it'll work out. So watch this. I'm sure you guys are kind of focused in here. As you can see, the line is kind of fraying on me. Right? But boom, I'm pulling it in. Get that fitting started. And now, what I like to do is I like to push against the line while I turn the fitting in. Hopefully you guys can see that. I like to take a little pride and make sure I line up the flats. There you go. There's a fitting installed. With Teflon fittings, you always want to leave a little bit of gap between the male fitting and the female fitting. And there you have it. That is a fitting installed, ready to go on the car. Now, this is the last line going on the car. Everything else I've already installed. Out of the 40 feet of -6 line that came in my kit, I've got a little over 10 feet left over. And this is a pickup truck install, so, you know, I used a lot of line, both the feed and the return. They give you more than enough. So unless you got like a Cadillac or something, you should be good with what's included in the kit. I'm not used to working with such nice componentry on such a dirty install, but you can kind of see where my feed and return are coming off the tank. I still have to add something to hold these lines up and out of the way of the axle and the shock. I left them a little long on purpose to that end so I'd have some room to work with, but they come out from the tank, they cruise along the side of the frame, and there's a little trim panel here on the side of the bed. They tuck in. They run down the frame rail. I've got my 10 micron filter here on the feed line. They come up and through the body. And the feed comes straight through and into the throttle body, and then out of the throttle body into the regulator, and then down from the regulator back to the fuel tank. We've also got our billet throttle pedal installed as well, with an, as for now, 3D printed pedal pad that'll eventually get replaced with a sandcast piece. And I think I'm gonna do something to match for the brake and clutch, but you guys are gonna have to wait for that one. So from this point forward, basically what I gotta do, I gotta get the wiring harness in here, I gotta get the computer installed, gotta get the dash panel mounted, and then we're pretty much ready for the first fire up. So let's get to it. All right, before we go over to the vehicle with the harness, let's have a look at it out on the bench here. We'll start with the handheld. I have the 5-inch handheld. It connects to the CAN plug. Got a couple of fuses right there. We've got our hookup wires. The heavier red wire is the 12-volt battery. The heavier black wire is the battery ground. We've got a skinny red wire, which is an ignition switch and cranking, 12-volt positive. And then we've got the orange wire, which is from the fuel pump relay to the fuel pump itself. Here we have our 2 relays. Here we have weather pack type connector, which goes to our additional wires. I believe I'm only going to be running the green wire, which is fan 1 on. There might have been one other one. Don't quote me on that. We'll cover it in the install. So I believe the CAN wire is the only thing that's going to run through my engine bay. We have our ECU hookup. I think I'm going to put this on the inner fender. I haven't decided 100%. Could go on the inside, but the harness seems kind of laid out to have this stuff all in the engine bay. Going over to the engine, VR is going to be where our distributor hooks up. We're going to set this up for timing control. We've got our coil lead over here. Got our coolant temperature sensor wire, our wideband O2, fuel pressure sensor, which I am not running in this application. And then this hooks up to our throttle body for our IAC and TPS and all that good stuff there. So again, we'll back out. That is the entire wiring harness. All right, if I fall on my ass, you can't laugh because I'm standing on a huge patch of ice. The sun is obviously on the side that you're on, and this side of the Jeep hasn't gotten anything but shade for days. So I had a bunch of snow that's now melted, and yeah, anyway. Here comes the harness. I've been pondering how to do this for a couple of days now. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to snake it all behind the back side of the distributor. Walk slowly so I don't fall on my ass. All right, so there's our throttle body plug right there. Now, I hope that you guys can see this. I'm going to put an Adele clamp up here on the firewall. Right there. To get this part of the harness up out of the way of the spark plug wires and everything, because you don't want these wires to touch spark plug wires at all. And then once I've got that mounted there, I'm gonna get my 2 fuses mounted here, like so, or sorry, 2 relays. And then I'm gonna have to put a hole for my CAN bus wire to go through for the handheld. I don't know if you can see this down here, but I've got my connector for all my additional wires right there. And then computer and power hookups going this way. I'm not gonna film the whole thing because it's just gonna be drilling some holes and installing some screws, but I'll bring you back in and show you when I get it all set up. Here's that big pile of ice I was telling you guys about. All right, so I haven't fallen yet. I got that Adele clamp in, started on some very basic cable management. Got my 2 relays mounted and my 2 fuses mounted. Now it's time to mount the computer. All right, so here's a closer look at where I've run this harness. This is the Aces harness here running behind the distributor. I've got a pretty good gap between it and the spark plug wires, and the distributor body, as you go around back, comes underneath the coil bracket. Coil wire comes off there, comes out here, goes up to the relays, and then around to the fuses. I really don't have room on the firewall. I know some people like to mount the coil on the inner fender. On a Chevy, especially when your inner fenders are in the very front part of the motor, I hate doing that. I hate running a coil wire that long. I feel like that has the potential to cause more electromagnetic interference than just putting the coil in the firewall, running a nice short coil wire. But that leaves me only 2 spots for my computer. And the way the Aces harness was laid out, I didn't have room for the computer over there. So I'm gonna put the computer right here, and I hope I'm not gonna live to regret it. I might live to regret it because of the proximity to the alternator, but it's up on the fender well, so it's away from heat. They give you rubber vibration isolators to mount it, so it's not gonna vibrate. I just hope that this alternator putting out electromagnetic interference a few inches from my computer doesn't cause issues, and it might, and if it does, I'll let you know that it did. It's not an idea that I feel great about, but I'm out of options. So tuck the rest of the harness up here like this, zip tie it with the rest, and that just leaves my 4 hookup wires. Here's a closer shot of the ECU mounting, and it is awfully close to the alternator. Nobody says not to do that. It just kind of seems like common sense that the alternator might create a lot of electromagnetic interference. It's not touching, so hopefully not. All right, I want to bring you guys in for a final look here. We're just about ready for the first fire up. Got all the wiring finalized. Got my ignition coil wire in. Got my cable for the throttle installed. Got all my wiring tucked up nice and out of the way. Went ahead and installed heater hoses so that I can hopefully run the heater in this thing. You guys know I'm a big fan of 3D printed parts, so I 3D printed some cable separators, some hold downs for the fuses, and a cool little standoff for the heater hoses as well. Yuck. There it is. All right, here we go. Key on. All right, now we're going to do the startup wizard. Select our system. We're going to say, don't show me this again on next startup. Killshot, configuring. All right, I'm showing 12 volts battery. Idle air controller position is at 174 steps, so I think I'm going to have to adjust that, but we'll go with it for now. Ignition advance 15 degrees. Engine coolant temperature 66 degrees because the engine is cold. Showing 0 RPM. That all looks good. So let's go to our menu. Let's go to Wizards. Let's go to Start Wizard. We're going to select the Killshot. stock cam. This part's confusing because up here it says Wizard, dual wideband oxygen sensor. And that doesn't mean that dual is selected. As you can see, the box, it says only wideband oxygen sensor 1 is selected. So we're gonna click the next box. We're gonna choose magnetic because we're gonna let it control the timing. Killshot only has 4 injectors, so we're gonna leave that there. They are 100.53 pounds per hour, so we're gonna leave that there. Engine displacement, this is 289 cubic inches because it's a 40 over 283. So we're gonna say okay. Hot idle speed 850 seems good to me. All right, so now we can verify everything we've entered. Stock cam, only wideband oxygen sensor 1, magnetic, 4 injectors, 100.53 pounds per hour, 289 cubic inches. We're gonna check the checkbox and we're going to save the setting. Please key off for 5 seconds to make configuration effective. So we're gonna key off. 1001, 1002, 1003, 1004, 1005. All right, we're gonna key back on. And we're gonna turn the key. But before I turn the key, I'm gonna move you to the outside because this is the very first startup with this thing. I want you guys to see it. So hang tight, let me move the camera. It runs. All right. I'm pretty stoked, man. This thing fired right up and it seems to idle pretty darn smooth. I need to get in here with my timing light and verify that I am truly at 15 degrees before top dead center. I did the static thing with the balancer and I think I'm pretty close, but I want to put a timing light on it to be sure. I also need to look into those idle air controller steps because I believe it's supposed to be lower and there is a process that you go through and you calibrate that. So I still need to do that before I drive it and go through the self-learning process. So that's where I'm going to call this video, but I will be back in the very near future with another video on the self-learning process and then maybe even get my laptop out and see if I can learn how to use their tuning software. But initial impressions, pretty good. Like I said, this thing fired right up, runs smooth. I let it fully heat cycle, got it all the way up to 195 and then the fans kicked on automatically, brought it down to 190, shut off. It sat there and stabilized. So I'm pretty happy. This thing, it's a big improvement over what I had in terms of control. My carburetor, like I said, was tuned pretty good, but I think ultimately this fuel injection is going to hopefully give me a little bit better fuel mileage, a little bit easier cold starting on the really cold mornings. And I got a heater now too. I didn't show you guys that, but the heater works. So, and the heater cord doesn't leak. So thank goodness. Anyway, look for another update from me very soon. We'll get this thing on the road and get some tuning, get some video behind the wheel. And thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you on the next one. All right.